So anyway, there it was in 409 Squadron. And the CF-100 Mark V was wonderful. A lot of power. We worked all the time up to 45,000 feet. It was just fine up there. We couldn't go higher because we didn't have pressure suits, and if the cabin pressure happened to be lost and you were much above 45,000, you were in deep trouble. So we stopped at 45,000 also.
So quick question with the CF-100. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's a large airplane.
34,000 pounds was the takeoff weight. And
Yeah.
It was a large airplane. We carried 8,000 pounds of fuel. We were good for to dry tanks, 2 hours, 45 minutes, maybe 3.
Mm-hmm.
In Comox, we were always watching the fuel and the weather, especially in the winter, which went from March to October. And there were days, just day after day, you'd take off in a pounding rain, and wind and clouds from 300 feet up to 40,000 feet.
Wow.
And you'd do your thing. We intercepted Strategic Air Command a lot, B-47s, B-52s, sometimes B-50 electronic countermeasure airplanes, and each other, and the Americans F-89s from Payne Air Force Base in Washington State. And we had a lot of number 1 scrambles at Comox because we were jokingly called the Royal Pacific Air Force because the next fighter squadron in the all-weather trade was at North Bay, Ontario.
Oh, yeah.
So everything coming down the west coast had to be on track and on time, and if they weren't, we would get scrambled. We got a lot of what we called number 1 scrambles. There were 2 crews on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and one would be number 1 and the other would be number 2. I remember one night in I think it was January '59, and there was a hell of a storm. We always had a hell of a storm, but this was a real hell of a storm. And there were no alternates. The wind was 50 gusting to 70. I think that's miles an hour. Ceiling, there was always a bubble over the runway ceiling, 300 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Cloud top, God knows where. And the scramble bell went, and we were number 1. And my nav and I ran out to the airplane in this driving rainstorm, and hey,
Jeez.
and got airborne. And as I got permission to take off, and I said to the tower, "We ain't coming back here tonight." I meant it, but it turned out that was not possible to go anywhere else. So the radar site at the end of Vancouver Island, which was called Consort, they got in touch with us and said, "Well, we have a target for you. It's about 100 miles out to sea from us. It's 10,000 feet." So I said, "Well, we'll go out there at 30,000 and then we'll come down." This is all in cloud and huge winds. So we got out over the North Pacific. Glad I couldn't see the waves, and because it was pitch black. This was about 1 o'clock in the morning. Got down to, picked up our target, closed in on him with radar, couldn't see a thing. Eventually, we got close enough to see this guy. This was all taking time at low altitude, burning a lot of fuel. Well, it turned out it was a C-124 Globemaster from the USAF, I think they called themselves Material Air Command, or MATS, I forget. Anyway, we got really up close and personal and identified this guy and passed on his numbers and all that.
Now, did you have a light attached to the aircraft that you could shine on him? Or?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, we were just glad he had his nav lights on. But he had a light, and so I'm just sitting there real close to him because I wanted to see his number, and he turned a searchlight on me because he finally somebody had said, "We have visitors." So, and he blinded me.
Oh,
I had this bloody great light, look.
Yeah.
And I'm right beside, I can't see a thing. And I didn't see anything for a while after.
No kidding, yeah.
No
That's
kidding.
kind of him.
So, but I had already got his number and what he was and so on. He was way off course because of the storm. And of course, in those days, you didn't have the magic navigational aids you have today. We had a low frequency receiver and an ADF. When the radar wasn't working at Comox when we came home, you either did an ADF approach, which most people were reluctant to do in bad weather, because over the mountains you kept getting false station passages. It was better to go for the cone of silence, which is right out of the Stone Age of flying. But that's what we had.
Yep.
And occasionally the radar would be down, and we would be recovering with ADF approaches, which most people were reluctant to do, and radio range approaches, which were right out of the Dark Ages. Anyway, by the time I climbed back up again, checked the weather, and there were no alternates. The closest alternate for me was Calgary, 400 nautical miles from Comox.
Yep.
And that was not going to happen. So I said, well, I guess we're coming back there. I knew we had GCA, but the GCA antenna was not in a bubble. It was out in the open, and at wind speeds of 70 or over, it tended to stall out. So it would turn, but it couldn't turn because the wind was too much for it.
So the wind force, with the radar spinning, the wind would be too much for it to spin.
Yeah, it couldn't spin.
Wow,
And
okay.
then, and that didn't sound like fun at all. So the local radar at Comox was called Waterfall, and they brought us in, and the GCA picked us up, and I still remember, he said the wind is still 50, blah, 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 gusting to 70 or more. And but it was a southeaster, so the wind was right down the runway, but it was bumpy.
Oh, yeah.
And I forget what the ceiling was. I didn't care. I was going to land. And we did land, and the radar antenna kept turning.
Thank God for that.
But those are the kind of anxious moments you'd have at Comox. And some people in the wintertime tended to get a little bit fidgety. I don't recall ever getting fidgety, but there were some people who needed to have a rest, because it was every night you were facing these storms coming in off the North Pacific, and they were doozies. But you got to be pretty good after a while, and you got to almost treat it all like routine.
Mm-hmm.
And then
it would definitely improve your skills significantly to fly that kind of hard IFR.
Well, you had to be good.
Yeah.
We had a number of what we called retreads on the squadron.
Mm-hmm.
World War II pilots who had joined up after the Korean thing started. Some of these guys were great guys. Some of them should never have been there.
Really?
And I won't mention any names.
No, of course not.
But some of them, they couldn't let them go flying in bad weather because...
Flight is not what they're used to.
I remember flying in formation was one of these guys one time, and the weather wasn't bad, but I was following him down for a GCA. It was one of the roughest rides I've ever had. He only seemed to have two inputs to his controls, full over and full off. And likewise with the power.
Oh, wow.
And I'm sitting there, and I hadn't been there very long, and I didn't have a lot of experience, but I had an awful lot of confidence. And I remember I eventually broke off this guy. He go bang, and I'm sitting on his wing right there, and I'm going.
Yeah.
And eventually I broke off. I never said a word, and went around and joined. Geez, it's all under radar control, so he didn't even know I was gone. He was my leader, but so I came in 5 minutes later, and he had no idea I wasn't there all the way in. And he was flying that airplane, even on a good day, was a challenge.
Yeah.
So anyway, I could tell. Yeah.
When you used to intercept, did you ever end up intercepting any Russian bombers coming down, or were they?
No, never saw one. We had a number of scrambles where they seemed to think they might be. I remember one day there was some kind of international crisis, and they stopped all training. They had all the aircraft lined up on all the ones that were available lined up on the flight line. We were told if the scramble bell goes, chances are this is it.
Okay.
And it just so happened my navigator and I were holding down number one, and everybody else had gone to lunch. Canada on the alert, and the scramble bell went, and we were laughing all the way out the airplane. Those guys are having lunch.
Yeah, no kidding.
And we have this all to ourselves. How lovely.
Yeah.
Because we really did want to fire all those rockets, 58 of them. So we took off, and the consort said, I got a target for you. It's out over the North Pacific. He's down low. He's at, I think it was 5,000 feet. And I thought, oh, okay, that could be a Russian bear. Everybody was very businesslike. And I remember talking to my navigator and saying, maybe we should arm our weapons. You had to arm the rockets because maybe as we get closer and perhaps get a little bit excited, God help us, we might forget. That would be terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So we did. So consort got me down to 5,000 feet. I now was not doing an identification, I was doing an attack. I was set up to attack this unknown. And everybody hoped, and it was, fortunately, the weather wasn't, it was summer, and it wasn't bad. So we picked up the target after a while. And I thought, holy shit. And then at about 5 miles, about that, I recognized it as a U.S. Navy P2V7 disappointment. So I said, Bob, we better disarm that. So we did. So I changed the attack into I swung in behind him. And I still remember up in the front there's sort of a bubble compartment for, I guess, some observer or something. So I came up beside this guy, and the guy in the bubble was having a nap. But I guess somebody said something, because he suddenly went and he just about fell out of the airplane. If it hadn't have been closed in, he probably would have. So we flew along with this guy and took down his number and went back home, and consort said, geez, I'm glad you guys weren't armed.
You're like, yeah, we weren't.
Well, you never said a word.
No, of course not.
So I want to tell you about, if we're out of, have we got enough time?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I want to tell you about one accident at Comox that was very interesting. That was one night it was December 16th, 1958. And I had about, I don't know, a total of 500 or 600 hours. And I'm coming in always at night, always in weather. And what I didn't know, as I was on GCA coming in, another one of our aircraft right overhead, both engines flamed out. They couldn't start them. They ejected. And there was a southeaster blowing. I don't know what the wind was at the time, but surely 40 knots or more. And the Georgia Strait just heaving. Anyway, we landed. I didn't know anything was going on. I came in the flight line, and already there was a bit of a commotion. The boss was already there. So we found out that Callahan, the pilot, a guy from Dawson Creek, and McLaren, navigator from near Montreal, Longueuil, I think, had bailed out. That's all anybody knew. So I went over to the boss and said, I'd like to take off and see if we can find them. It's such a dirty night. Now, a peacetime boss would have said, no way, as I don't need another airplane in the Georgia Strait, and it's not going to be fun out there. It's pitch black. You're at low level. Actually, a few years later, 101 Voodoo went out to do the same thing and crashed. Anyway, he said, yeah, get going. This was the kind of wartime leadership. He had a guy or two guys in the water as far as he knew. And the sooner they found them, the better chance of them surviving if they could be found. And to hell with his career.
Mm-hmm.
This is the difference between a guy with a DFC and a peacetime bureaucrat.
Yep.